My name is Charlotte, and I want you to imagine this. The slap echoed through the living room like the crack of a whip. My cheek burned heat, radiating outward while the metallic taste of blood hit my tongue. For a second time froze. My ears rang, my vision blurred, and the humiliation of 3 years came crashing down in one instant. Across from me, I saw Vivian, my mother-in-law, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. She leaned back in her chair as though she had orchestrated this moment all along. Beside her, Belle giggled softly, hiding her mouth behind manicured fingers, her eyes glittering with cruelty. And Trevor, my husband, stood tall, flexing his fingers after striking me a look of smug dominance etched across his face. He had done it before, but this time something was different. He looked at me not with love, not with regret, but with triumph. To him it was a show of power, to his mother it was entertainment, and to his sister it was proof that I was never really part of this family. For 3 years I had swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every degrading laugh. I told myself I could survive it, that marriage meant compromise, that family meant endurance. But in that moment, as my tears threatened to spill, the weight of silence became unbearable. "Maybe now you'll remember your place," Trevor muttered, straightening his tie as though nothing had happened. His words cut deeper than the slap. My place. According to him, my role was to smile quietly to support him no matter what, and to shrink so that his ego could shine. I wanted to scream, but before I could even form words, the air in the room shifted. The sound of measured footsteps echoed from the marble hallway. The front door had opened without anyone noticing except me. My body tensed. And then he appeared. Colonel James Camden, my father. 30 years in the military had carved his presence into stone. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to move fast. He simply stepped into the doorway, flanked by 2 soldiers in full fatigues. His steel-gray eyes scanned the room like a battlefield, landing first on my tear-streaked face, then on my reddened cheek, and finally on Trevor's still-raised hand. The transformation was instant. Trevor's smirk faltered. Vivian's cruel laughter died in her throat. Belle froze mid-giggle, her face paling as though the blood had drained from her body. Even the air seemed to stop moving, like the house itself was holding its breath. My father didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply let the silence build until every second became unbearable. Then with terrifying calm, he said, "Gentlemen, I believe we've found our target." It was as if the ground tilted. Trevor stumbled back a step. Vivian's glass rattled on the table. Belle clutched her phone like it could shield her. And me. For the first time in years, I felt the faintest flicker of safety. You see, my father had always warned me. He told me that real strength isn't about control, it's about protection. And standing there in that doorway, he embodied every lesson he'd ever tried to teach me. I pressed my palm against my burning cheek and realized that this exact moment was going to change everything. Because the night my husband struck me and my mother-in-law laughed, my father walked into the room with 2 armed men. And nothing in our lives would ever be the same again. That was the beginning of the end, but also the beginning of my freedom. The silence after my father's words was unbearable. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the sting of Trevor's slap still fresh on my cheek. Yet all attention had shifted to the doorway, where Colonel James Camden stood, with 2 soldiers at his side. His authority filled the room like a storm rolling in. Trevor's lips parted, but no sound came out. Vivian's hand trembled as she adjusted her glasses, as though dignity could be restored by a simple gesture. Belle clutched her phone tighter, her eyes darting between her brother and the armed men, as if searching for an escape. I wanted to speak, but my father's gaze locked on mine. Calm, steady, reassuring. He did not need words to tell me I was safe now. "Sir," one of the soldiers said quietly, his posture rigid. My father raised a hand, silencing him. Then he turned back to Trevor, his voice low, but laced with steel. "Explain yourself." Trevor stammered. "It was nothing. A family disagreement. You don't understand." My father took a single step forward and Trevor stopped. That was all it took. 30 years of command, 3 decades of authority compressed into one quiet step. I realized then how small Trevor looked under my father's gaze. How insignificant Vivian's haughty air became. How fragile Belle's mockery seemed. and I realized something else. I had endured their cruelty for 3 long years. Yet in this moment with my father here, their power crumbled to dust. My breath caught. For years I had been conditioned to keep quiet, to accept humiliation as normal. But seeing Trevor pale in front of my father stirred something inside me. A flicker of defiance. A whisper of the voice I had silenced. I remembered every insult. Every dinner where my cooking was mocked. Every time Trevor dismissed my career as basic care. Every look of disdain from Vivian, every giggle from Belle. I remembered the night she threw away my grandmother's quilt, and Trevor told me to be grateful. Grateful. My chest tightened. I had been grateful for scraps of affection, for fleeting moments of kindness, for a love that never truly existed. But tonight, I felt the truth settle in my bones. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. And I wasn't alone anymore. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling but audible. "I'm okay." His eyes softened for the briefest second before hardening again as he turned to Trevor. "No," he said. "You're not okay, but you will be." Trevor's shoulders slumped. He opened his mouth again, searching for excuses, but the weight of my father's presence silenced him. Vivian tried next. "Colonel Camden, this is unnecessary. This is a private matter." My father's head turned sharply. "When a man strikes my daughter, when a family enables his abuse, it ceases to be private." Vivian's lips closed. For once she had nothing to say. That night in that charged silence, I understood that my life was about to change forever. Not just because my father had walked in, not just because Trevor had been caught, but because for the first time in years, I believed I deserved better. And that belief, small, fragile, but real, was the first step toward freedom. Before I tell you how everything unfolded, let me pause for a moment. If you are listening to this right now, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country or your state in the comments. I love knowing where this community is tuning in. And if this is your first time hearing one of my stories, consider subscribing. Your support helps me keep sharing these powerful journeys of resilience and justice. Now let's go back. Let me show you how 3 years of cruelty led to this breaking point, and how the dinner that was meant to secure Trevor's promotion became the night his empire began to collapse. 6 hours before that slap echoed in the living room, I was standing in the dining room adjusting silverware under Vivian's hawk-like gaze. She had already moved the salad fork 3 times, her designer bracelets clinking with every exaggerated gesture. "No, no, Charlotte," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "The Waterford crystal belongs on the right. How many times must I explain this? Trevor's boss expects elegance, not this amateur display." I swallowed my irritation and adjusted the setting again. It wasn't my house. It was hers, though the deed said otherwise. Every inch of this place bore her fingerprints, from the overpriced wallpaper to the chandelier she insisted we needed to impress Trevor's colleagues. I had long since stopped arguing. In the kitchen, Belle sat on the counter, filing her nails, a glass of wine in hand. "The flowers are too tall," she announced with a casual wave. "They'll block conversation." "Honestly, Charlotte, it's like you've never hosted before." I bit down on the words that rose in my throat. "I haven't hosted before because you never let me." 3 years of marriage had trained me to keep my thoughts tucked safely behind my teeth. Trevor appeared in the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks, his eyes scanning the room with a look that mingled entitlement and anxiety. "How much longer?" he asked. "Braxton will be here in 1 hour. Everything needs to be perfect." I nodded, spooning caramelized onion tarts onto plates. I had spent all afternoon cooking his favorite appetizer from scratch. It wasn't love anymore. It was duty, obligation disguised as affection. He moved behind me, his hands settling on my shoulders. To an outsider, the gesture might have looked tender, but his grip was firm, a warning pressing into my skin. "You know how important tonight is. Don't embarrass me." The words chilled me. "When have I ever embarrassed you?" I asked, my voice quiet. "There's always a first time." His smile was sharp, not warm. Before I could answer, Vivian's voice rang from the dining room. "Trevor, darling, come look at the centerpiece. We may need to change it entirely." He squeezed my shoulders once more, too hard, before walking away. I stared down at the tarts, wondering when my life had become a stage play I could never perform correctly. That's when the memories came rushing back. Our wedding day only 2 years earlier felt like another life. I had floated through candlelight and silk, convinced I was stepping into a fairy tale. My father had walked me down the aisle in his dress blues, his chest gleaming with medals, pride glowing in his eyes. Even he had seemed charmed by Trevor. He seemed solid, my father had said during our father-daughter dance. Driven. That's good in a man, as long as he remembers what's really important. I had laughed too happy, too blinded. He adores me, Dad. You should see how he takes care of me. Taking care of me. That was what I believed then. But taking care of someone isn't about money or appearances. It's about how you treat them when no one is watching. 6 months into our marriage, the first crack appeared. You spent how much on groceries, Trevor had barked, waving an $80 receipt like evidence of betrayal. It's the same as always, I had said. Maybe a little more because I bought steaks, you like them. He shook his head. It's not about the amount. It's about the principle. I work hard and you just spend without thinking. I remembered standing there bewildered, realizing that the man I married had been replaced by someone I didn't know. Another month later, I mentioned picking up weekend shifts at the hospital. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Absolutely not. My wife doesn't need to work weekends. What would people think that I can't provide? I loved nursing. It wasn't about the money. But he made me feel selfish for wanting fulfillment. And then came Vivian. At our first family dinner, she plucked at the fabric of my dress. Is this from Target? How practical? Trevor had laughed. Mom, not everyone can shop at Nordstrom. The laughter, the constant comparisons, the quiet dismissals they piled on, until I stopped recognizing myself. Now standing in that dining room arranging forks and tarts, I understood. Tonight wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about Trevor's career, his image, his hunger for power. And I was expected to play my role quietly. But I couldn't ignore the knot in my chest. A voice whispered inside me, faint but growing. This cannot be all there is. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever been at a family dinner or gathering where every word you said felt like the wrong one? Where you wanted to defend yourself but swallowed it instead? Tell me in the comments. I want to know if you've ever felt that same knot of silence pressing down on you. Because what happened next at that dinner didn't just unravel a meal, it unraveled an entire marriage. The guests began to arrive just as the candles flickered to life in the dining room. I forced myself to smile, carrying platters of appetizers to the table, my hands steady, though my heart was racing. Mr. Braxton, Trevor's boss, was a distinguished man with silver hair and a calm presence. His wife, Andrea, followed close behind, her eyes, warm, her smile genuine. From the moment Andrea shook my hand, I sensed something I had not felt in years: respect. She looked directly at me, not through me, and her grip lingered just long enough to remind me I was visible. Dinner flowed smoothly at first. Conversation about the law firm, the upcoming cases, the charity events Vivian adored flaunting. Belle scrolled her phone between bites, chiming in only when she could mock someone else. I stayed quiet, filling glasses, serving dishes, and keeping my head down. Then Andrea turned to me. Pediatric nursing must be incredibly rewarding, she said with genuine curiosity. I have always admired people who dedicate their lives to children. It takes such patience and skill. The words startled me. They were not casual politeness. They were recognition. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe. It really is, I began. Just last week, we had a boy who was terrified of his surgery. By the time he left, Trevor's voice sliced through mine like a blade. Mia is being modest, he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. She just does basic bedside care, nothing too technical. The table fell quiet. Heat rushed up my neck and I felt the familiar sting of humiliation. But Andrea's brow furrowed. Actually, pediatric nursing requires extensive training, she corrected gently. My daughter considered it before going into family practice. I tried again, my voice small but steadier. Yes, the continuing education alone is. Trevor cut me off again, louder this time. Mia tends to oversell her role. You know how it is, everyone wants to sound important. A silence settled over the table, thicker than before. Even Vivian shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mr. Braxton cleared his throat. Actually, Trevor, I think your wife was sharing something meaningful. Andrea, you were asking about the little boy. His eyes met mine, patient and expectant. And there it was again, respect. encouragement. I swallowed hard and continued. He was 7. He had to undergo brain tumor surgery and was convinced he would wake up different. We spent hours talking about superheroes, about how sometimes going through hard things gives us new strength. When he woke up, the first thing he said was that he felt braver. Andrea's eyes glistened. That's beautiful. What a gift you gave him. It's just part of the job, I said softly, but I couldn't help smiling. No, Mr. Braxton interjected firmly. That's leadership. That's what makes the difference between good health care and exceptional care. Something inside me shifted, a quiet unfurling like a flower finding sunlight after years of shade. I felt pride fragile, but real. For a brief moment, I remembered the woman I had been before Trevor's family reshaped me into their version of acceptable. But across the table, Trevor's face was darkening. His jaw clenched, his fork stabbed at the food like it was a personal enemy. I knew what that look meant. I would pay for this moment later. Still, I couldn't let the feeling go. Not this time. Not when I had finally been seen. The rest of dinner blurred into a haze of forced conversation and stilted laughter. Trevor smiled tightly, trying to mask his anger, but I felt it radiating like heat across the table. Every time Mr. Braxton praised me, every time Andrea asked a question, I saw Trevor's composure crack a little more. When the plates were cleared and the guests offered warm compliments about the meal, I should have felt relief. Instead, dread coiled in my stomach. The night was far from over, because while Andrea had given me validation, Trevor saw only betrayal. Right. And that betrayal in his mind would demand punishment. Quick pause here. Have you ever had someone try to silence your voice just when you were finally being heard? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes speaking out together reminds us we're not alone. Hike. That night, the dinner ended, but the storm was only beginning. The moment the Braxtons' car pulled away from the driveway, I felt Trevor's mask shatter. His jaw was set tight, his shoulders stiff, and his footsteps heavy against the marble floor. Vivian and Belle drifted toward the living room, with glasses of wine, leaving me alone with him in the foyer. What was that? Trevor asked, his voice dangerously calm. I tried to keep my own voice steady. What was what? Don't play dumb, Charlotte. You dominated the conversation. You embarrassed me, in front of my boss, in front of the man who controls my future at the firm. I blinked at him, stunned. Andrea asked me directly about my work. I answered her. You should have been gracious, brief. But no, you turned it into a performance. You made yourself the center of attention. His voice rose, then cut off as he glanced toward the living room. He lowered it again, but the fury in his tone was unmistakable. You humiliated me. My heart pounded. Something inside me snapped. I embarrassed you by answering a question, by being good at my job. That's what humiliates you. Trevor's eyes narrowed. Your place is to support me, not to grandstand with stories about children and superheroes. Tonight was about me, my career, not about your bedside anecdotes. The words stung like acid, my place, as if I were nothing more than an accessory to his ambitions. From the living room came Vivian's sharp laugh. I told you she'd ruin it, she called out. The girl has no sense of propriety. Mother, please, Trevor muttered, though there was no real rebuke in his tone. I walked into the living room trembling but determined. No, let her speak. Apparently everyone has an opinion about my behavior tonight. Vivian sat tall in her armchair, wineglass in hand, every inch the queen holding court. Belle lounged on the couch, eyes glittering with curiosity. Oh, honey, Vivian said with mock sympathy. You have to understand, tonight wasn't about you. It was about Trevor's career, his future, and you made it all about yourself. My little nursing stories, I repeated, my voice tight. She's right, Belle chimed in. You hijacked the conversation. It was awkward for everyone. I stared at the three of them, my husband, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, the people who were supposed to be my family. My knees shook, but my anger held me upright. So let me understand this. When Andrea asked me directly about my work, I should have deflected. Pretended I don't have a career. You should have been brief, Vivian said firmly. A simple, it's rewarding, would have sufficed. Then you redirect back to Trevor, to his accomplishments, because his accomplishments matter. The room tilted. My breath came in sharp bursts. His accomplishments matter and mine don't. That's what you're saying. Trevor exploded. For once in your life, couldn't you just support me without making it about you? I laughed, then a bitter sound that startled even me. Support you, Trevor? For 3 years, I have done nothing but support you. I rearranged my schedule around your needs. I let your mother redecorate our house. I smiled while you diminished my job in front of friends. I've made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. And tonight, because I dared to speak, you think I betrayed you? The silence was heavy electric. Belle lowered her phone. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Trevor's face flushed red. You made your choice tonight, Charlotte Trevor said coldly. You chose to embarrass me, to put yourself before me, to show everyone you don't respect me or our marriage. No, I said softly but firmly. You made your choice. You chose to tear me down in front of people who lifted me up. You chose to protect your ego instead of your wife. You chose to side with your mother's cruelty instead of standing by me. How dare you, Trevor hissed. How dare I what speak the truth? After 3 years, I think I've earned the right to say it. Trevor's hand twitched. His composure cracked. His eyes burned with fury. For the first time, I saw the man behind the mask completely exposed. And I knew something terrible was coming. So, let me pause here for a second. Has anyone ever told you to know your place, to make yourself small, just so someone else can shine? Share it in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. It helps us grow this community where voices like ours are finally heard. Because what happened next would tear the last shreds of illusion apart. Trevor's words still hung in the air when his face twisted with rage. You want to know what matters, he spat. I'll show you what matters. His hand shot upward. For the first time in 3 years of marriage, I did not flinch. I met his eyes, my voice low and steady. Do it. Show them exactly who you are. The silence in that room was deafening. Vivian leaned forward, her eyes alight with anticipation, as though this moment would prove me unworthy once and for all. Belle's lips curled into a cruel smile, her phone now recording. I could hear the faint click as she started filming, ready to capture my humiliation like it was a form of entertainment. And then it happened. The slap cracked through the room like a gunshot. My cheek burned, the sting racing through my skull, but the pain was nothing compared to the humiliation. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the sofa for balance. And over the ringing in my ears, I heard it, the sharp, delighted laugh of Vivian. Finally, she sneered. Someone put her in her place. For a moment, the world tilted, their faces blurred, laughter echoing as though I were trapped underwater. My chest heaved, and I wondered how I had become this, a woman mocked, slapped, dismissed in her own home. But before I could collapse into despair, another sound cut through the chaos. The heavy creak of the front door opening, the measured rhythm of boots striking marble. Everyone else was too drunk on cruelty to notice, but I did. I turned toward the doorway, heart pounding just as my father stepped into view. Colonel James Camden. He wore no uniform, only a simple jacket, but the authority radiating from him was unmistakable. 30 years of reading battlefields had honed his gaze into something that could freeze men in their tracks. Behind him stood 2 soldiers, their eyes scanning the room with precision, their posture rigid and disciplined. The change was immediate. Trevor froze mid-smirk, his hand still raised. Vivian's laughter died in her throat, her wine glass slipping slightly in her fingers. Belle dropped her phone onto the couch with a dull thud, her eyes wide. My father's gaze traveled slowly, from my tear-streaked face to my reddened cheek, to Trevor's hand still poised in the air like a weapon. His voice was calm when it came, but it carried the weight of command. Gentlemen, he said to the soldiers without looking away from Trevor, I believe we've found our target. The words dropped into the silence like a bomb. Trevor stammered, his bravado crumbling. Colonel, I can explain. But my father took one step forward, just one, and Trevor fell silent. Vivian tried next. This is unnecessary. This is a private family matter. My father's head turned toward her, his steel gray eyes pinning her in place. When a man raises his hand to my daughter, it ceases to be private. Her mouth snapped shut. I pressed my palm against my cheek, my breath shaky. For the first time in years, I felt something I had nearly forgotten: safety. The soldiers moved closer, not threatening, but present their eyes fixed on Trevor. The air thickened, the house itself holding its breath. My father's tone dropped lower, but every syllable vibrated with power. "Charlotte, are you hurt?" I'm okay," I whispered. His gaze softened for a heartbeat before hardening again. "No, you're not, but you will be." The weight of those words pressed into my chest not like a burden, but like a promise. Trevor's shoulders sagged, Vivian's hand trembled. Belle sat frozen, her recording forgotten. And me. For the first time in 3 years, I felt the scales shifting. I realized then that tonight wasn't only the end of my silence. It was the beginning of their reckoning. Let me ask you this. Have you ever reached that breaking point where fear no longer controls you, where you finally see someone for who they really are? If you have, share it in the comments. Your story matters. And if you're finding strength in this journey, don't forget to subscribe. It helps this community of survivors grow stronger every day. Because what my father revealed next would change everything. The tension in the room was unbearable. Trevor's hand lowered slowly, as if gravity itself had turned against him. My father didn't raise his voice, but his presence made everyone shrink. Vivian looked pale beneath her perfect makeup. Belle sat stiff, her phone abandoned beside her. Trevor finally found his voice. It was nothing, just a disagreement. She overreacted. I didn't mean my father's words cut like a blade. He nodded once toward the soldier on his left. "Sergeant, what did you observe when we entered this room?" The soldier's voice was steady. "Sir, I observed a male subject with his hand raised in an aggressive posture over a female who appeared to have been struck. The female showed visible signs of impact." My father turned to the second soldier. "Corporal?" "Same observation, sir. 2 additional females in the room did not intervene." The silence after their words was suffocating. Trevor swallowed hard. Vivian sputtered. "This is outrageous. This is our home. You can't just—" But my father's gaze silenced her again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, setting it down on the coffee table with deliberate precision. The soft thud of paper on wood echoed louder than any shout. "For months I've been tracking what's been happening in this house," he said. His tone was calm, almost conversational, but it carried the weight of judgment. "Charlotte may not have told me everything, but I didn't need her to. I know what abuse looks like." Trevor's face drained of color. "Tracking? You can't?" My father flipped open the folder. Photographs, screenshots, reports. He spread them out slowly like evidence in a trial. 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator. What we found was illuminating. My breath caught. I hadn't told him. I thought I had hidden it well enough. The bruises explained away the missed family visits, the excuses. But he had seen through all of it. "You thought I wouldn't notice when my daughter stopped calling, when she made excuses to miss dinners, when her light dimmed every time I saw her." His eyes narrowed. "You underestimated me." Trevor reached for the papers, but one of the soldiers shifted, blocking him. He froze, sweat beading at his temple. My father leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving Trevor. "Your law firm has very clear policies about domestic violence, maintaining integrity, protecting reputation. I shared this with Mr. Braxton earlier today." Vivian gasped. "You didn't?" "I did," my father said firmly. "Prison would be too quick, Trevor. Too easy. Instead, you will lose everything you tried to protect by hurting my daughter." The room spun around me. I gripped the back of a chair, my breath uneven. This wasn't just about the slap anymore. This was about every night I had cried quietly in our bedroom. Every insult, every humiliation, every moment I convinced myself to endure. Trevor sank into a chair, his bravado gone. Belle covered her mouth, realizing what this meant. Vivian whispered, "You're destroying our lives." "No," my father corrected, his voice calm but unyielding. "You destroyed your own lives the moment you decided my daughter's pain was acceptable collateral damage." My throat tightened. Tears blurred my vision, but for the first time they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of release. Have you ever wished someone would finally step in for you when you no longer had the strength to fight? Let me know in the comments. And if this moment hits you the way it hit me, consider subscribing. Your support keeps these stories alive for others who need them. That night I realized something. My father wasn't just rescuing me. He was handing me back my voice. And once I had it again, I was never going to lose it. Trevor slumped in the chair, his eyes darting from the folder of evidence to my father's unflinching gaze. Vivian gripped her wineglass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Belle sat rigid, her hands twisting in her lap. The empire of control they had built around me was collapsing brick by brick right before their eyes. But my father wasn't done. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but precise. Trevor, your law firm received these documents this morning. Photographs, witness statements, medical records, text messages where you berated Charlotte, and financial records showing how you cut her off to keep her dependent. Trevor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't. This is entrapment. It's illegal. My father smiled, a cold, calculated smile that sent chills through the room. Oh, but I can. I don't need to put you in prison, Trevor. I want something better. Consequences, suspension pending investigation, and termination when the evidence proves what we all know. Trevor's face turned gray. Vivian shot up from her chair. You can't ruin my son's career over a domestic disagreement. The calm in my father's voice made her falter. This isn't a disagreement. This is a pattern. And you, Mrs. Brennan, have enabled it every step of the way. Her glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Annabelle, my father continued, turning to my sister-in-law. Congratulations on your engagement. I hope your fiancé's family is forgiving when they learn how you stood by while your brother struck my daughter. Belle's phone buzzed on the couch, notification after notification. The whispers of scandal were already spreading. Her face paled as she picked it up, scrolling with frantic eyes. Trevor finally rose to his feet, his voice desperate. Charlotte, please. We can work this out. I'll get help. I'll change. Something inside me cracked open, then not with despair, but with clarity. For 3 years I had made myself small to survive. For 3 years I had apologized for things that weren't my fault. For 3 years I had let them convince me I was the problem. Not anymore. I stood taller, my cheek still burning, but my spirit igniting. No, Trevor. You had 3 years to change, and instead you hit me in front of your mother while she laughed. You sided with cruelty over love. There's no coming back from that. I reached for my wedding ring, sliding it from my finger. The diamond that once symbolized forever now felt like a shackle. I set it down on the coffee table right beside the photographs of my bruises. The sound of metal against wood echoed louder than his slap had. This marriage is over, I said clearly. My lawyer will be in touch. Vivian gasped. Belle whispered, No. Trevor stumbled toward me, his hand outstretched, but one of the soldiers stepped forward. He stopped cold. My father's voice softened as he turned to me. Charlotte, gather your things. I retrieved your grandmother's quilt from the garbage where they threw it. It's safe now. It belongs with you. Tears welled in my eyes. That quilt, my last piece of family of history of love, had been treated like trash by these people. But my father had saved it just as he was saving me. I looked around the room one last time, at Trevor stripped of power, at Vivian, her reputation shattered, at Belle already facing the fallout of complicity. For 3 years I believed I was trapped. In truth, the cage had always been open. I just needed the courage to walk out. I slipped my hand into my father's. His grip was steady, strong, a lifeline pulling me out of the storm. And as I turned toward the door, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom! Before I go further, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had that moment where you finally decided enough was enough, that split second, where survival became freedom? Share it in the comments. I promise your story can inspire someone else. Because walking out of that house wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new life I was finally ready to claim. The night air hit my face like a baptism, cool, cleansing, final. I stepped out of that marble prison with my father at my side and 2 soldiers walking behind us. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like the world outside those walls belonged to me again. We didn't speak until we reached his car. My father opened the passenger door and I slid in, clutching the quilt he had rescued. My fingers brushed the worn fabric, each stitch a reminder of the women who came before me, women who had endured wars, depressions, and hardship, yet still carried on. I pressed it against my chest and whispered to myself, I will survive too. Inside the car, the silence wasn't empty. It was safe. My father finally turned to me. Charlotte, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about leaving Trevor. It's about reclaiming yourself. Tonight you took the first step, but the rest that will be up to you. I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. For the first time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of release. As we pulled away from the house, I glanced back one last time. The windows glowed warm against the night, but inside was nothing but cold. Trevor stood frozen in the doorway, Vivian crumbling beside him, Belle frantically tapping her phone. Their empire had cracked. Their carefully curated image was collapsing, and I was gone. The following days blurred into a storm of lawyers, investigators, and revelations. My father's folder had not only been shared with Trevor's law firm, but also with his country club, Vivian's charity boards, and Belle's fiancé's family. The fallout was swift and merciless. Trevor was suspended immediately, his cases reassigned. Within weeks, he was terminated after financial irregularities surfaced. Clients came forward with complaints. A class action lawsuit formed. The man who prided himself on control was suddenly powerless. Vivian's empire of respectability shattered. The country club revoked her membership. Her charity positions disappeared. Donations dried up and her name became synonymous with scandal. Belle's engagement crumbled under the weight of public shame. Her fiancé's family couldn't tolerate the association. The wedding was canceled, her social media flooded with backlash. She had laughed at my humiliation, but now she tasted her own. And me, for the first time in years, I could breathe. I returned to work at the hospital. The same hallways, the same patients, but everything felt different. I was different. When I leaned over a child's bed to soothe their fear, I wasn't just a nurse anymore. I was someone who had fought for her own life and won. One morning, my supervisor called me into her office. My heart pounded, afraid of bad news. Instead, she smiled. "Congratulations, Charlotte. You've been promoted to pediatric nursing supervisor. You've shown extraordinary leadership, and the committee agrees you're the right choice." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The position I had dreamed of, the one Trevor had called not worth the stress, was mine. Not because of him, not despite him, but because I had never stopped being good enough. When I walked out of that office, I held my head high. For the first time in years, pride didn't feel dangerous. It felt deserved. But freedom wasn't just about my career. It was about using my voice. Andrea Braxton reached out, inviting me to speak at a women's leadership conference. She said, "Your story matters. Other women need to hear it." I hesitated at first. Did I really want to stand on a stage and relive it? But then I remembered the look on her face at that dinner, the respect that had sparked my courage. And I said yes. Because silence had cost me too much already. This is where I want to pause for you. Because what's coming next in this story will change everything again. I want you to ask yourself, if you had the chance to turn your pain into power, would you take it? Would you stand up and speak? Think about that. And if you're with me on this journey, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what happens when I finally step into the light. That was 6 months after the night my father walked into the living room. 6 months after Trevor's downfall. 6 months into my new beginning. And the next chapter of my life was only just starting. 6 months passed like a whirlwind. Every headline, every scandal, every whisper of Trevor's downfall reminded me how far I had come. He had been stripped of his partnership, disgraced in his own profession, and exposed for the fraud he truly was. Vivian, once the queen of society circles, now hid behind closed blinds in Florida, her perfect image reduced to ash. Belle's engagement had crumbled under public shame, her phone still buzzing with messages she no longer had the courage to answer. But me, I was finally rising. My days at St. Mary's Hospital had taken on a new meaning. I wasn't just tending to children anymore. I was mentoring new nurses, organizing support groups for parents, and learning how to lead. I had stepped into my new role as pediatric nursing supervisor with a mix of fear and determination. But every time I saw a frightened child's face light up with comfort, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. One morning, as I was reviewing charts, I received a call from Andrea Braxton. Her voice carried that same calm strength I remembered from the dinner party the night everything broke open. Charlotte, She said we're hosting a women's leadership conference next month. I would be honored if you shared your story. My hands trembled around the phone. My story. Yes, Andrea insisted. Women need to hear what you've been through and how you turned it into power. You have a voice and it matters. For a moment I was paralyzed. Did I really want to stand on a stage and open old wounds? Did I want to expose the darkest corners of my life to strangers? The instinct to hide was strong, but then I remembered the little boy who had told me he felt braver after surgery. I remembered the patients who looked to me not just for care, but for hope. And I remembered Andrea's eyes that night when she looked at me with respect I hadn't felt in years. I'll do it, I whispered. The weeks leading up to the conference were filled with preparation. I wrote late at night, pouring memories into words, shaping pain into lessons. The first time I read my speech aloud, my voice cracked. The second time I cried halfway through. But slowly, something shifted. The more I spoke, the stronger I felt. By the time the conference arrived, I wasn't just telling a story. I was reclaiming it. Standing on that stage, the lights bright and blinding, I took a deep breath. Faces stared up at me, some curious, some skeptical, some quietly aching. My hands shook, but I began. I thought my life was over the night my husband hit me in front of his family, I said. The room went still. But what I learned is that silence destroys us faster than violence. When I finally found my voice, I found my freedom. I spoke about the humiliation, the bruises, the quilt my grandmother made that was almost lost forever. I spoke about my father, about the night he walked into the living room with 2 soldiers and changed everything. And I spoke about rebuilding not just my career, but my sense of worth. By the time I finished, the room was silent again. Then slowly applause rose like a wave. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunderous, alive, filled with recognition. Women stood, some cried, some clapped with their whole bodies. In that moment, I realized I had not just survived, I had become a voice for others. Afterward, a young nurse approached me. She was no older than 25, her sleeve tugged down to cover a bruise on her wrist. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Can we talk? I think I need help." My heart clenched. I saw myself in her trembling eyes. "Of course," I said gently. "You're not alone." "Oh, have you ever listened to someone's story and felt like they were telling your own? If you have, I want you to share it in the comments. Your words might be the lifeline someone else is waiting for. Because that day as I walked off that stage, I knew my story was no longer just mine. It was a light for others still lost in the dark. When the conference ended, I returned to the hospital with a different kind of strength. The applause still echoed in my ears. But what stayed with me most was the look in that young nurse's eyes, the mixture of fear and hope. The silent plea for someone to tell her she wasn't crazy, she wasn't alone. It reminded me of myself not so long ago. The Charlotte who had stared at her grandmother's quilt in a garbage bag and convinced herself that silence was safer than truth. That woman was gone now. Meanwhile, Trevor's world was collapsing. News traveled fast in our city. His law firm had released an official statement announcing his termination. Reporters uncovered financial irregularities, mishandled cases, and whispered stories about his temper. Former clients banded together, filing a lawsuit that made headlines in every local paper. I read one article during a late-night shift. The words felt surreal. Brennan and Associates under investigation for misconduct. Former partner Trevor Brennan accused of domestic abuse, financial mismanagement, and professional negligence. For years he had strutted through our home bragging about his brilliance, his indispensability. Now his name was synonymous with disgrace. Vivian didn't fare much better. Her name was stripped from charity boards. Her country club membership revoked. Invitations to galas vanished. In whispered tones, society circles called her a pariah. The woman who had laughed when her son struck me could no longer laugh in public without people turning away. And Belle, poor spoiled Belle, was left abandoned. Her fiancé broke off the engagement after photos from that night surfaced online. Pictures of her smirking while I cried, of her sipping wine while her brother raised his hand against me. The world saw her not as glamorous, but as complicit. They were all paying the price. Not because I sought revenge, but because the truth has a way of tearing down walls built on cruelty. For me, life was not only about survival anymore, it was about rebuilding. I poured my energy into the hospital. I developed family support programs, teaching parents how to comfort children before surgeries. I organized workshops for nurses to recognize signs of domestic abuse in their patients. Each initiative reminded me that pain could be transformed, that the scars on my heart could become tools in my hands. One afternoon, I walked into room 312 to find Emma, a 6-year-old awaiting surgery, clutching her teddy bear. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't want to forget my dog," she whispered. "What if Buster doesn't remember me?" I sat beside her, holding her small hand. Sweetheart dogs never forget the people they love. Buster is probably waiting by the door right now, just counting the hours until you come home. Her giggle, fragile but real, filled the room. In that moment, I felt a swell of pride. The same pride I'd once been punished for feeling. Later during my rounds, my phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. Vivian wants to settle the defamation suit out of court, offering full restitution plus damages. I stared at the screen, stunned. The woman who had treated me as unworthy, who had tossed away my grandmother's quilt, was now begging for settlement. Social exile was expensive, apparently. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Karma had done its work. What? That night I sat in my apartment, the apartment decorated with my choices, filled with my laughter, anchored by the quilt draped across my bed. I thought of Trevor, of Vivian, of Belle. For years I had feared their power. Now their names brought only a quiet pity, 'cause I had something they never would: peace. Before I continue, tell me, have you ever watched someone's empire crumble because of the truth? How did it feel to see justice finally served? Share it in the comments. And if you're walking with me through this journey, don't forget to subscribe together. We're building a community where truth is stronger than silence. The truth had freed me, but what I would do with that freedom, that was only beginning. The months after Trevor's downfall felt like breathing for the first time. Each sunrise no longer carried dread. I woke up in my own apartment, surrounded by my own belongings, without Vivian's critical eyes or Trevor's controlling voice. My grandmother's quilt rested across my bed, its stitches reminding me that even broken pieces can be bound together into something whole. But freedom didn't mean forgetting. It meant deciding what I would do with the pain. One afternoon, I sat in my new office at the hospital reviewing charts when a message flashed across my phone. It was from Andrea Braxton. "Would you consider speaking at our upcoming Women's Leadership Conference?" My chest tightened. Public speaking terrified me, but Andrea had believed in me from the very beginning that night at dinner when I first dared to speak about my work. Her faith lit a fire inside me. I typed back, "Yes, I'll do it." Preparing for the conference forced me to relive everything: the laughter, the bruises, the silence I once mistook for safety. At first, writing my story felt like reopening a wound, but as the words filled page after page, I realized I wasn't just telling what had happened. I was shaping it into a weapon, a beacon, a lifeline. The night of the conference, the auditorium buzzed with voices. Rows of women filled the seats, some young and eager, others older and weathered, all carrying their own invisible scars. When Andrea introduced me, my heart raced, but as I stepped onto the stage, a strange calm settled over me. "I thought my life ended the night my husband struck me in front of his family," I began. A hush fell over the room, but what I learned is that silence is more dangerous than violence. The moment I found my voice, I found my freedom. I spoke for nearly an hour, about the quilt that had been thrown away and rescued, about the boy who found courage through his surgery, about the father who walked into a room with soldiers and changed everything, and about rebuilding not into the woman Trevor wanted, but into the woman I had always been meant to be. When I finished, silence lingered for a heartbeat before the applause erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was raw loud, a wave of recognition. Women stood, some cried openly, others clapped until their palms reddened. That night I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever been silenced. Later, as I packed up my notes, a young nurse approached me. She looked no older than 25, her sleeves tugged down to hide a bruise. Her voice shook. "Can we talk? I've been dealing with things at home." Someone told me you'd understand. My throat tightened. I saw myself in her. Yes, I said softly. You're not alone. We'll find a way forward together. She nodded, relief flooding her face, and in that moment, I knew my pain had found its purpose. But this was just the beginning, because helping one young woman meant helping dozens more. And soon I would find myself not only speaking on stages, but building programs to protect others. The scars on my skin had faded, the scars on my heart remained. But now they were no longer marks of shame. They were proof of survival. Ray, have you ever turned your pain into something that could help someone else? If you have, I want you to share it in the comments. Your story might be the hand someone else needs to grab. And if you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe. What comes next in this journey will surprise you. Because while Trevor, Vivian, and Belle were sinking deeper into disgrace, I was about to step into a role that would redefine everything I thought I knew about myself. 6 months had passed since the night my father stepped through that doorway with 2 armed men. Half a year of shedding old chains and learning to live on my own terms. In those months, Trevor lost his career, Vivian lost her reputation, and Belle lost her carefully constructed future. But I had found something far more valuable. I had found myself. At St. Mary's Hospital, my promotion to pediatric nursing supervisor was no longer just a title. It was a mission. I spent long hours designing family support programs, training young nurses, and working on new initiatives to help patients who came from unstable homes. For the first time, my voice carried weight. My ideas weren't dismissed, they were embraced. One crisp autumn morning, I sat at my desk, surrounded by stacks of proposals. My phone buzzed with a message from Andrea Braxton. Your speech last month is still being talked about. You've inspired so many women. Keep going. The world needs voices like yours. Her words lit something inside me. For so long I had been told I was too much, too loud, or not enough. Now my words weren't a liability, they were a lifeline. That same day I found a new message waiting in my inbox, from Belle. For a moment I considered deleting it without reading, but curiosity won. The subject line was simple, I'm sorry. The email was long filled with words I never thought I would hear from her. She admitted to enabling Trevor's cruelty, to laughing when I was humiliated, to staying silent when she should have spoken. She wrote about her broken engagement, her nights spent in therapy, her slow realization of the damage she had done. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She only wanted me to know that my courage had forced her to look in the mirror. I read her words twice. Anger surged, too little too late. Sadness followed for the years wasted. But beneath it all, a strange flicker of hope appeared. Maybe people could change. Maybe my story had started a ripple I couldn't yet see the end of. I didn't reply. Some chapters needed to stay closed. But I tucked the email away as a reminder even the smallest act of defiance can wake others up. Meanwhile, my programs at the hospital were gaining traction. I proposed a domestic violence screening protocol for healthcare workers to identify signs of abuse in patients and to protect staff who might be living through it themselves. The statistics were staggering. Too many of us who spent our days caring for others went home to houses where no one cared for us. The board approved my proposal. It was the kind of victory that once would have seemed impossible. That evening, I walked through the pediatric wing, pausing at each room. A little girl waved from her bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit. A teenager recovering from surgery gave me a shy thumbs up. Their smiles were my reward. As I turned the corner, I nearly bumped into Lisa, the young nurse who had confided in me after the conference. Her eyes no longer carried the same fear. Instead, they held a new light. Charlotte, she said, I started the support group you suggested. 3 nurses came. Next week, 5 more are joining. Thank you for giving me the courage. My chest swelled. The ripple was growing. So, before I move on, I want to pause here. Have you ever seen the ripple effect of courage? One brave act leading to another and then another. Tell me in the comments. And if this story is speaking to you, don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next shows just how powerful those ripples can become. 6 months earlier, I thought my life had ended. But now, as I stood in that hospital hallway surrounded by patients, colleagues, and survivors, I realized something. It hadn't ended at all. It had only just begun. A year after that night, I stood at the front of a packed conference room at St. Mary's Hospital. Rows of nurses, doctors, and administrators leaned forward in their chairs, waiting. The air buzzed with curiosity, expectation, maybe even a little skepticism. I smoothed the papers in front of me but didn't glance down. I didn't need a script anymore. My story lived in my bones. Patient advocacy, I began, is not just about medicine. It's about dignity. It's about seeing the whole person, their fears, their hopes, their hidden battles. And sometimes it's about standing up to authority when no one else will. A hand shot up from the crowd. A man in a crisp suit asked, "What about when advocacy puts you in direct conflict with leadership? How do you protect your job?" I smiled, thinking of Trevor, of Vivian, of all the times I had chosen silence over risk. That's the hardest part, I admitted, but I've learned the cost of silence is always higher than the cost of speaking out. Your voice has power. Use it. The room was silent for a moment, then applause spread slowly, growing stronger. I saw nods, people scribbling notes, others wiping their eyes. And in the back row, Lisa sat with her chin lifted high. She wasn't the frightened nurse who once pulled her sleeve down to hide bruises. She was now leading her own support group for healthcare workers in abusive relationships. Watching her, I felt something shift inside me. My pain had become purpose, my scars transformed into pathways for others. After the session ended, a small crowd formed around me. Questions, handshakes, thank yous. But one young woman lingered at the edge. She finally stepped forward, her voice tentative. "I'm new here," she said softly. "Could we maybe talk sometime? I think I might need help." Her words pierced me. They were almost identical to what Lisa had once said. And I understood then the cycle wasn't just ending with me, it was breaking wide open. That evening, I walked back to my office, my heels clicking against the tile. I passed the quilt hanging over my chair, a quiet emblem of survival. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Proud of you today, always." I closed my eyes and smiled, imagining him in his retirement, still restless, still finding battles worth fighting. It struck me then his battles had prepared me for mine. He hadn't just saved me that night. He had taught me how to save myself. And yet my story wasn't only about survival. It was about choice. The choice to stop apologizing for existing. The choice to transform pain into advocacy. The choice to become whole on my own terms. In the months that followed, I helped launch 3 new programs at the hospital, one for domestic violence screening, one for mental health support among staff, and one for patient families navigating trauma. Each time I walked into a meeting, I carried my scars with me, not as shame, but as proof of why this work mattered. Every ripple grew, every voice echoed. Let me pause and ask you, have you ever seen someone take the worst thing that happened to them and build something extraordinary out of it? If you have, I want you to share it in the comments. And if this journey resonates with you, subscribe now, because the ending of my story is not about revenge. It's about redemption, and you'll want to hear it. As I looked around at the hospital that had become my second home, I realized something profound. For years, Trevor and his family had tried to erase me to make me believe I was small. But now, standing tall in front of hundreds of people, guiding nurses who looked to me for strength, I knew the truth. I was never small. I was only waiting to remember how big I could be. 2 years after walking out of that house, I found myself standing in front of a mirror in my childhood bedroom. The sunlight streamed in through lace curtains, illuminating the simple white dress I had chosen myself. Not Vivian's idea of elegance. Not Belle's version of fashion. Mine. Behind me, my father's reflection appeared in the mirror. He wore his dress blues medals gleaming against the dark fabric. He looked at me the way he had on my wedding day years before, but this time there was something new in his eyes. Relief. Pride. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said softly. I turned to him, my throat tight. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for seeing what I couldn't see, for fighting when I couldn't fight, for believing I was worth saving. His hand rested gently on my shoulder. You saved yourself, Charlotte. I just made sure you had the chance to do it. We walked together to the hospital's memorial garden transformed for the occasion. Flowers lined the paths, fairy lights twinkled in the trees, and a small crowd gathered friends, colleagues, mentors, patients' families. My chosen family. People who had stood by me, lifted me, seen me. But this wasn't a wedding in the traditional sense. There was no groom waiting at the altar, no vows of until death do us part. This ceremony was for me. Dr. Arabella Chin, a close colleague who had become like a sister, officiated. She had even gotten ordained online just for the event. With a smile, she began, "Today we gather not to unite two people, but to witness a woman's promise to herself." I stood tall, my heart pounding, and spoke words I had written carefully, each one a vow of freedom. I, Charlotte Camden, promised to honor my own voice, to trust my own judgment, to never again make myself small for someone else's comfort. I promised to continue healing, to grow, to help others find their strength. And I promised to remember always that I am enough exactly as I am. I slipped a simple silver ring onto my finger, a promise ring, a commitment ring, not to someone else but to me. The crowd erupted in cheers. Tears glistened in my colleagues' eyes. My father clapped the loudest, his chest swelling with pride. For the first time, I didn't feel incomplete without someone beside me. I felt whole. The reception was held in the hospital cafeteria, transformed with fairy lights and flowers donated by grateful families. It wasn't glamorous, but it was perfect. There was laughter, music, and stories shared by people who had seen me at my lowest and now celebrated me at my highest. In one corner, Lisa stood surrounded by a small group of nurses. She laughed, confident and bright, no longer hiding bruises. She had started her own support group for healthcare workers in abusive relationships. Watching her, I felt a wave of gratitude. The ripple was spreading farther than I could ever reach alone. "Speech, speech," someone shouted. Soon the whole room was chanting. I stood raising my glass of sparkling cider. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. I began my voice steady. I had lost myself so completely I couldn't remember who I used to be. But I learned something important. You cannot destroy someone who refuses to stay broken. Applause shook the walls. I held up my hand for silence. The woman who was slapped in that living room, who was mocked and belittled, is still part of me. But she isn't all of me. She's the part that learned resilience, that discovered empathy, that knows how precious it is to be truly seen and valued. Across the room, my father wiped at his eyes, failing to hide his tears. So tonight is not just about celebrating freedom from an abusive marriage. It's about celebrating the woman I've become because of that struggle. It's about recognizing that sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the best things we do. Here's to second chances, to chosen families, and to the courage to rewrite our own stories. Here's to knowing that we are all worthy of love, especially from ourselves. The crowd erupted again, glasses clinking, voices cheering. In that moment, surrounded by light and laughter, I felt something settle inside me, not emptiness, not longing, but peace. Because this was my story, my vow, my freedom. Yeah, if you've been walking through this story with me, I want to hear from you. What promise would you make to yourself if you could stand before the world and declare it out loud? Share it in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe, because the next story might just be the spark you need to find your own freedom. That night, after the celebration faded and the fairy lights dimmed, I returned to my apartment, the space filled with books I loved, photographs. I chose colors that made me smile. I slipped out of the dress, folded it carefully, and placed it on a chair. Then I turned toward my bed. There it was, my grandmother's quilt, spread neatly across the mattress. The stitches were uneven in places, faded in others, but strong, always strong, just like the women who had held it before me, just like me. I lay down and pulled the quilt over my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt no fear that footsteps might storm down the hall, no dread that laughter might turn cruel, no silence pressing me into submission. The quiet in that room was different. It was peace, not punishment. As I closed my eyes, I thought of Lisa, of the young nurse who had asked me for help. I thought of Andrea Braxton, whose simple respect had sparked my courage. I thought of my father, whose unwavering strength had given me the space to rediscover my own. And I thought of every woman who might one day hear my story and realize she was not alone. Because that's the truth I wanted to leave behind. We cannot always control what breaks us, but we can decide whether we stay broken. I drifted into sleep with that thought wrapped around me, as soft and steady as the quilt itself. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of escape. I dreamed of tomorrow. A tomorrow I finally believed I deserved.